I just wanted to ask you because you heard John Carl mention there, it's obvious this will be appealed. One of the questions that comes to mind, how do you pay for the appeal? Obviously, with all of these other mounting fines that are just sort of extraordinary in just the terms of what kind of money we're talking about here, and how successful would or could an appeal in a case like this be?
Yeah, so he's likely to appeal. Now, he would probably have to post a surety bond in order to appeal, which means that they would take a portion of the judgment, maybe 10%, that he has to essentially put up as collateral while the appeal goes on. And if he loses, then that gets automatically forfeited. So in this case, I mean, if you look at, say, 10% of what he owes, $35 million, does he have that to put up? So that's the first hurdle. The second is what would actually be appealed. This was a bench trial, which means that the judge was deciding both questions of fact and questions of law, where normally you might have a jury decide the questions of fact. On appeal, the judge's determinations on those questions of fact are going to be given a lot of deference. So, for example, what his determinations were on the credibility of the witnesses, the fact that he felt, as he said in the order, that he did not believe that Trump or any of the other defendants expressed any remorse. And he believed that that evinced a intent to continue to engage in this if he didn't institute any kind of remedy. And then on the legal issue, this was a court of equity, which means that what he was looking at was how to make this fair again, that Trump had been cheating, and how do we compensate New York for this unfairness? So he was disgorging profits, where he was saying all of these ill-gotten gains we need to remove from Trump and give it back to New York. So this is all based on calculations of, interest he got away with not paying, or things that he was able to buy by securing loans or providing false statements. And so it would be, I think, unlikely on appeal for that kind of precise calculation to be in error. The one thing that could have maybe he prevailed on is that the judge initially had canceled all of Trump's business certificates. This is known as the corporate death penalty. It's a very draconian measure. Letitia James had tried this with the NRA, and the judge did not allow it. But this order actually modifies that earlier penalty, and he says, I'm not going to cancel all of the business certificates en masse. We're going to do it on an ad hoc basis as needed by this compliance monitor that's been appointed by the court. So I think this will be pretty steady on appeal, but Trump may try to appeal it.
Asha Rangappa, court of equity, as she points out, trying to square things, if you will, after years of the judge saying that Donald Trump, his business, his family members who were in business with him, grossly exaggerated the values of what they owned here in New York and beyond in order to secure better deals, better loans, access to loans that perhaps everyday Americans would not get access to unless they exaggerated their wealth and their value as well. Asha, thank you for that. And in fact, Aaron, you and I were talking off camera here about something the judge actually wrote in here about that, fully aware that the argument on the campaign trail is this is an attack, this is a witch hunt, this is political in nature, but the judge lays out why he came up with the numbers that he came up with.
He does, and sometimes he uses colorful language, but he's frank. He said, look, Donald Trump is not Bernie Madoff, the famous, infamous Ponzi schemer. The defendant did not commit murder or arson, but he says Trump's complete lack of contrition and remorse borders on pathological, and crucially, Justice Engoron said this court finds that defendants are likely to continue their fraudulent ways unless the court grants significant injunctive relief. And so he's saying Trump's going to be a recidivist, fraudster, unless the penalty is so severe, $354 million, and a ban from business in New York for the next 3 years is pretty severe. Unless he imposed something that severe, the judge became convinced that Trump would continue to commit fraud and continue to exaggerate his wealth.
But as Asha points out, the judge did not give Letitia James everything that she'd asked for.
She did not, and not quite the amount of money that Letitia James may have been hoping for.
But close.
But it's very, very close.
But on the business certificates?
He did not end up canceling the business certificates as the judge initially had done. And even then, the Attorney General didn't ask him to do that. He sort of freelanced that on his own in a partial summary judgment motion. He takes that back here and instead imposes a monitor over the Trump Organization. So former President Trump's business now has a semi-permanent babysitter, and Trump himself cannot be involved in any of these transactions for the next 3 years.
And as we know, he's in his late 70s, which is, as we know, young and plenty of time to do many things. But in the world of business, to be held off from doing any kind of business here in New York for 3 years, you would think is significant to someone who's made a career and certainly built their career here in New York.
And his kids can't do business for the next 2 years. So the Trump Organization is in flux. And we had thought initially, had the judge gone forward and canceled the business certificates, what would have happened to the Trump name on all the buildings around here? Seems like the name can stay, but the status of the company and who's going to lead it for the next couple of years, that's what's very much in question. And $354 million, David, may well eat up the remaining cash that he has on hand.
And obviously they can put that on hold while they appeal, but they'll have to put up something.
They either have to put up the bond, as Asha says, and there is some interest that could increase the penalty effectively,
right,
or you effectively have to put it all in escrow with the court. And I don't know.
So either way, it ties up the money.
Who's got $354 million lying around?
Certainly no one's here on this desk. Aaron, thank you. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who covers Capitol Hill and the race for president for us. And Rachel, as John Santucci had pointed out earlier, after the headlines, and we've only had one that's as eye-popping as this, and that was the damages after E. Jean Carroll. Now we have $354 million in fines in this case alone for Donald Trump, the civil fraud trial, and the email, the fundraising appeal has gone out.
Just went out just minutes ago, David. So now Donald Trump facing this massive fine. His campaign, the Super PAC, already blasting out an email to his supporters asking for 1 million of them to start to chip in. As we have noted, this is money that the former president is using to pay for his legal fees. $50 million of it went toward that in 2023. In the short term, we have not really seen this impact the former president when it comes to Republican primary politically. He dominated in Iowa. He dominated in New Hampshire. He's ahead in South Carolina. But when you look at the long term and all that the former president is now facing, 91 criminal charges, multiple trials possibly here ongoing throughout the course of this election, when polls asked voters whether or not they would support the former president if he is convicted, this is where you see Donald Trump start to lose his edge in a head-to-head matchup with President Biden. The biggest shift is among independents. He drops about 11 points. And this is all the more reason why you have rivals like Nikki Haley staying in this race. She says that Americans would not vote for a convicted felon. That's Donald Trump.
Rachel Scott with us here. And of course, those are the trials still yet to come, though today's decision will certainly loom large for Donald Trump himself and his family and the Trump Organization, and whether or not Donald Trump supporters in the country will be swayed by this kind of number and the argument that the judge has made in his decision, which is $354 million isn't an attack. And the judge in his decision lays out why he came up with that number, essentially saying, as Aaron Katersky said a moment ago, making the case that if it weren't a number like this, that this kind of business behavior would in fact continue. Again, Donald Trump fined $354 million. Each of his two eldest sons, Don Jr. and Eric Trump, both fined $4 million each, and all three of them prevented from doing business in New York for the next several years. John Santucci, do we have a reaction from the Trump Organization from Donald Trump?
David, we have so much reaction. I'm just going to flag an email that literally we all just received from our colleague Avery Harper. Donald Trump, David, already fundraising off of this decision, playing into that conversation that you, me, Rachel Scott, and everyone were just having. The reaction is remarkable coming in right now. The Trump Organization claiming that, this is a miscarriage of justice, that they, of course, plan to appeal. Similar statements from Donald Trump's attorneys, David. And the Trump Organization statement, I believe, written by the two sons, echoing that conversation I had with Eric Trump, that they believe that this was an effort by the Attorney General to go after them personally. They believe that this was a miscarriage of justice. And they maintain, David, they have run a clean business, never missed a payment for any of the loans that they have out with Deutsche Bank and others that were mentioned throughout the proceedings that we saw go on for several weeks and months in downtown. And David, you got to imagine for right now, the question they're trying to figure out is, with that independent arbiter coming in, what happens in the immediate future? But the one thing we do know, and Aaron mentioned this with you a couple seconds ago, the Trump name that is emblazoned on buildings all around New York City for now remains, David.
You heard those arguments, John Santucci, thank you, from the Trump sons, from the Trump family. The judge says that's simply not the case. The evidence proved otherwise. And again, they were found liable previously. This trial was about the damages and what kind of punishment they would face. Today, we learned it this afternoon that the judge in this civil fraud trial, again, finding Donald Trump, the former president, $354 million, and each of his sons $4 million each, which takes you to about $363 million. The Attorney General, Letitia James, had asked for $370 million. She did not get that number, though the judge came very close. And again, both Donald Trump and his two sons prevented from doing business here in New York for the next couple of years. Our coverage continues on ABC News Live, abcnews.com. For those of you here in the East, many of you have local news starting at 4 o'clock Eastern, and I'll be back with the entire team for World News Tonight a little later today. I'm David Muir in New York. Good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.
Works. Brick and I are the only ones that have to know what's going on. We bring Jocelyn into this. She's going to drive